Hi everybody, hope you're having a great Friday night. This is the latest episode of What's It To You with Carter and Jack. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about in tonight's show. Two major American sports have begun the process of picking their champion. The NBA Finals and the Stanley Cup Finals are one game each underway, and Jack and I are here with our predictions as to what's going to happen for the remainder of those series, who will take home the title. Our picks are straight ahead. Also, we've got a lot of social media questions to get to tonight, including which baseball teams are going to be able to continue with a hot streak, which ones might have a surge in them later on in the season. We'll discuss that. In soccer news, we now know for sure, at least according to a report by the Sunday Times, that the Qatar 2022 World Cup bid was won because of bribery, mostly. We talk about whether or not a FIFA revote is in the cards because of that, and whether the United States might be the nation that steps in to host that World Cup. Very interesting topic that will be coming up later on in the show. All that plus much more, and my parting shot. What's It To You starts right now. And hello once again from Columbia High School Studio 1A. This is What's It To Ya. I am Carter Woodiel, and he is Jack Worth. Let's get right to it. We're going to talk the finals here. The two cold weather American sports are just about to come to a close. Let's start with hockey because you guys are asking about it on Facebook. We're going to start with a social media question here from Sean, and he asked, hey guys, in regards to the NHL finals, as a New Yorker, I'm rooting for the Rangers, but I am mighty scared of the Kings. Do you think the Kings have exhausted themselves playing Game 7s in every series and are out of magic? Or do you agree with some of the experts in saying that they are a team of destiny? Or in other words, as Daniel puts it on Facebook, what are your predictions in the outcome of the Stanley Cup final? Jack, I know you're a Rangers fan here. Do you think your team is going to take home the Stanley Cup?
Well, I'm going to answer Sean first because Sean, brings up a point that I think a lot of Ranger fans are hoping for. The Los Angeles Kings have exhausted themselves playing 21 games over the course of the playoffs. I don't think that has an effect.
I don't know.
They've played 21 games. They've played 3 7-game series. The fact of the matter is the Rangers have played 20 games.
Yeah, it's one game difference.
A 7 games and a 6. It's a 1-game difference, but the Rangers make up for that by having to fly across the country. And I think we're at the point where these athletes are good enough that it's not going to be an effect. The Los Angeles Kings are going to come out flying. They're going to be a very energized hockey team. This is the Stanley Cup Finals. I don't think we're going to see a situation like Montreal where they just came out flat in the first 2 games, really, unexpectedly.
Yeah. I also kind of take issue with that team of destiny moniker that he's putting with the LA Kings, because if I'm going to pick which of these teams is a team of destiny on here, I'm picking the Rangers, just because they're the team that nobody thought would be here. The LA Kings, we thought would contend. Generally, I know you picked the Chicago Blackhawks to win the whole thing, and they went toe-to-toe with them, but it feels to me like the Rangers have put together the more improbable run out of these two teams.
I think absolutely. I think the Los Angeles Kings team of destiny thing, I never really understood it the first time I heard it. They did come back from that 3-0 deficit in the first round, which is we're talking about destiny. That's a magical thing. That's a once in a generation comeback that's only happened a handful of times. But again, you talk about the Rangers. This is a team who was down 3-1 to a team that they were heavily expected to roll over for, and they not only give them a series, they obviously come back and blow past the Canadiens. But I think we can say with confidence that destiny will have a small part in the series. I don't think that, whichever is the team of destiny, probably, I don't think their destiny is going to affect the series too much. I think supernatural powers are going to stay out of the Stanley Cup this year for the most part.
I think they stay out of it every year.
But I still like the Rangers because I think that the Los Angeles Kings are, you can make the argument that they're a better team
because they are.
Guys won first line, second line, third line, which they probably are. They've played tougher played tougher competition throughout the playoffs. But you can't ignore what is in hockey the most important fact, which is the Rangers have the better goaltender.
Okay, but it's not like Jonathan Quick is a terrible goaltender. It's not like you're going up against Marc-Andre Fleury like they did in the series against Pittsburgh. Jonathan Quick, he's inconsistent, but he can be a very good goalie when he needs to be. And I understand that Henrik Lundqvist is becoming a once-in-a-generation type talent. You want to talk about once-in-a-generation stuff. Henrik Lundqvist is incredible, but he's not going to single-handedly win the Rangers games. I've got the Kings in 6 in this.
Well, and I think when we talk about Jonathan King, you're so right in using the word inconsistent, but I think that Quick is given the benefit of the doubt because of the run he had a couple of years ago.
Okay.
Where he played an otherworldly postseason, won the Conn Smythe, and won the Stanley Cup. But when you look at his numbers this postseason, this past series with Chicago, even this regular season, it's the type of numbers that if you had no knowledge of Quick's career beforehand, you're saying, wow, I see the Rangers having a huge advantage in this department.
Well, but that's just one department, though. And I'm hard-pressed to find another department where the Rangers have a clear edge. I mean, it just seems like the Kings are the more complete team. They're the more balanced team. And don't get me wrong, Henrik Lundqvist can win this team a couple of games because he can just go on fire and just be Henrik Lundqvist, and the offense can do just enough to get by. But I don't think that one goaltender up against a team like this can single-handedly win a series.
And I don't think they can. And I think, you have to, so you need to start looking at the Rangers roster and say, if Henrik can steal you 2 games, you hope. 2 games by one player is miraculous. Where do those other 2 games come from? Where are you getting those wins?
And hopefully they're not in the same 2 games.
Well, what I think is sort of an underappreciated unit, at least for the Rangers, is their defensive pairings. Ryan McDonagh gets a lot of press, as he should. He's one of the best defenders in the league. But the Rangers, top 4 defensemen, those first 2 pairings, I think they're sort of underappreciated because they're not offensive players.
Yeah.
The Rangers aren't a team that gets goals from their blue liners, which hurts them in some aspects, but it also, it can make those defensemen not get the type of attention that they should be getting, because the fact of the matter is, if those defensemen can match up with a Los Angeles Kings line of forwards that, we can say are better than the Rangers, if they can neutralize that, well, suddenly we have a series.
And I agree with you there. When we talk about going back, you mentioned that 3-1 deficit against the Penguins earlier. We were looking and saying, this Rangers defense it was shaky at the beginning of the postseason. And I think it's really improved. I think it is, that's a strength that the Rangers have. But I don't think it's something that can overcome the fact that the offense still has some pretty big question marks. We have to move on now to the NBA Finals, a whole other championship series here back to back on the show. It's the Heat and the Spurs, and I think that's exactly what we could have predicted 6 weeks ago when the NBA season began. These two met in the NBA Finals last season. The Heat were champions. What do you think makes this year different, if anything?
I don't think this year is much different. I think, if you look at, obviously, the cores of the team are virtually unchanged. Mm-hmm. You can look at this Heat team and definitely point to a regular season regression. Obviously, by Dwayne Wade, by players who are considered role players on the team, Mario Chalmers, Norris Cole type players. But I think, when it comes down to Game 4, Game 5, Game 6 of the NBA Finals, this is a Miami Heat team who's going to be, just as good as they were last year, and that was good enough to win the championship. I think the Spurs are the team that's going to have to be better. They lost last year. I think Miami is virtually unchanged. The Spurs...
Well, Miami's lost some pieces.
Miami has lost pieces.
Yeah.
But I think if the Spurs are to win this series, they're going to have to step up.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And you mentioned Dwayne Wade. I think one of the big differences between this year and last year is last year it was Dwayne Wade was so old and creaky that at times the Spurs would just abandon him on defense when a guy was going in for the lane for the Heat. They can't do that now. He has looked remarkably young and spry and efficient for Miami in the time that he's played in this postseason. And I think that's going to have a big impact on how this series plays out.
I think it's a big impact. And when you look, let's look at the other side of the court at the Spurs. I like the improvements they've made since last season. They're a very similar team, but they have pieces. They add pieces. I think, the front office looked at that team after Game 7 of last year and said, we are very, very close. But as it stands, we are not better than the Miami Heat. They added players off the bench. Leave it to a guy like Greg Popovich to turn Patty Mills from, a guy who shouldn't really be in the NBA to a valuable piece off the bench to a potentially championship-winning team.
And that's the thing that I'm so interested to watch in this series. You mentioned, Greg Popovich is an incredible coach, and we've seen the Miami Heat make adjustments over the course of playoff series for years now. It's going to be so interesting to see how these teams, play chess in a way as we go game by game over the course of this 7-game series, because I think the adjustments that these teams make is really what's going to be different in a series that is very, very close.
And I think that, that's absolutely right. I think these are not only the 2 most talented teams in the league, it's the teams that from game to game within a series make the adjustments better than anybody else. And that's a huge factor in a series like this where they are so evenly matched. If one team exposes the flaw of another early on, we can expect both teams to sort of come back in the next game, counter their, change their game plan. We saw it last year. Danny Green in games 2 and 3 hits an NBA Finals record for three-pointers, and Miami comes out, they change their game plan, they adjust, they shut them down. So it absolutely will be an interesting series, game to game, new storylines after each game. It's a series we're going to revisit after the series is over, but for now, let's move to baseball. We're still very far from the finals in Major League Baseball, just entering the post-Memorial Day the post-Memorial Day. It's the start of the stretch run. It's an area of the year I like to think is when the real teams start to separate themselves, and the teams who are great stories in April and May slide back into where they should be in the standings over the summer.
And I think we've got a question from Facebook about just this. If Jared asked us on Facebook, now that the baseball season is almost halfway through, who have been the biggest breakouts and underperformers so far? Will they stay at their current paces? I think you're talking more about teams. I think that's the more interesting angle to this. If you're talking about one breakout team, the Toronto Blue Jays are a name that comes right up there. I remember when we were doing our preview show, we were talking about how the AL East had 4 different teams that could win the division, and then the Toronto Blue Jays. And when you look at that, as of Tuesday, they are 4 games ahead. They're 4-game lead in first place over the second place Yankees. You think they stay there for the rest of the year?
I would be shocked if we're having this discussion even on September 1st, that the Toronto Blue Jays are leading the American League East, because you say they're 4 games up. This is a point in the season where 4 games it's such a small margin, and they're having a dream season through these first 2 months. Mark Burley is not having a great year for Mark Burley. Mark Burley is having an incredible year for any pitcher in the history of baseball, and I think we all can agree that's not going to continue. So if we look at this Toronto Blue Jays team and say, everything that they could have hoped for has gone right so far.
Exactly.
They're still in a position where they're one bad series away from second place.
And it's not just Mark Burley if you're talking about the Blue Jays pitching. Their bullpen, if you're going by ERA, is the second worst in all of baseball right now. Even with Casey Janssen, their closer, being lights out since he came back from his injury, that bullpen that's a huge weakness right now for this team. And you're absolutely right. This is a team that relies on power. They play in a hitter's ballpark, but you can't expect Edwin Encarnacion to continue hitting homers at the pace that he's had over the month of May. You can't expect Melky Cabrera to continue being a viable home run threat the way he's been at the beginning of the season. I think you're right. I don't see any way this Blue Jays team can get better. I see a lot of ways they could get worse.
And you mentioned the bullpen just quickly. It's such an important factor that's going to be going forward, because if you have a weak bullpen and you can skirt around it with Mark Burley, going 8 innings and giving up 1 run every night, well, that's okay. Or if you're playing games and you're hitting home runs, say you're winning by 5 runs, you can't count on that for the rest of the season. If you're talking about Mark Burley regressing to the mean, there are going to be games where he leaves games earlier, and the Blue Jays are going to be in tight game situations, and then you have to have a reliable bullpen to stop the bleeding.
And we'll see exactly what happens. Maybe our predictions will be totally wrong. Maybe the Blue Jays will keep playing, but I think we agree on a lot of the stuff as we look ahead in the Major League Baseball season. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're talking World Cup. The Qatar bid was a result of bribery, but can we host the World Cup instead? After a revote, a lot of things have to go in place, but we'll talk about all of it and a lot more to get to as well on tonight's show. We're going to talk about why the New York Knicks can't get a head coach. We're hearing Derek Fisher. We had Steve Kerr, but he left for the Warriors. What's the issue going on there in New York? We're going to discuss that and maybe talk some college baseball as well. All that coming up next. Stay right where you are.
Slow down.
Slow down and move over.
And move over.
When you see lights,
vests,
or reflectors,
please give us some room. Slow down and move over.
when you need us,
we've got your back.
Do you have ours?
You got our back?
You got ours? You got our back?
Please, slow down.
And move over.
My songs know what you did in the dark.
And we welcome you back. This is What's It To Ya? I am Carter Woodiel alongside Jack Worth, and we are going to get right back to the action here. We're going to talk some soccer. Less than a week now until the World Cup begins in Brazil 2014. I know Jack and I cannot wait, but we're looking at a little bit ahead to the future. We're going to preview the whole 2014 World Cup next week on the show, but the Qatar World Cup is taking place in 2022. At least that's the way it is right now. The bidding came in. They awarded it to this oil-rich nation with 120-degree temperatures in the summer and a lot of money, and we all figured, well, something has to be up with this bid. And now, according to a report by the Sunday Times of London, it is true. There was bribery involved. The figure is over $5 million to get this bid in there. And now that it's become publicized, FIFA has been forced to comment on it. The vice president, Jim Boyce, told BBC Radio that he would support a revote if these accusations are proven to be true. Do you think, Jack, there's going to be a revote? Do you think this is going to be moved out of Qatar? And if so, where do you think it might go? There is the United States. We've got all our stadiums ready. I mean, there's a lot to talk about here.
Well, I think in terms of the revote, it's a situation that, at the moment, looking at the current situation where we stand with FIFA, it seems almost inevitable. I think, although as soccer fans, it is almost hard to assume that FIFA will do the right thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, I would be in favor of a revote regardless of the United States' intentions on hosting. Which the second part of that question is, I would be very surprised if it was anyone other than the United States who came out in a revote, because not only did they have an official bid for 2022? I mean, this was a bid that, if it wasn't for Qatar, may have won regardless.
Yeah.
And now if you're in a situation where, you're having a vote 4 years behind schedule, you're only 8 years before the World Cup, 7 years, 6 years, who knows when this revote will be if it even happens. It's a country that is always ready.
Right. That's the key here is when you talk about bids more and more with the World Cup, with the Olympics as well, similarly, it's about what stadiums can you build? What can you put together over the course of the next, 12 years before you have, before the event actually comes around? The USA could host the World Cup tomorrow. We've got enough stadiums, and like you said, we've already prepared the bid. We've got these, sites laid out all across the country, and I feel like it just makes sense to say, well, we really made a big mistake here by putting it in this country with only one major airport. Let's put it in a giant global superpower with plenty of airports and plenty of stadiums. If I'm FIFA, that's what you do, and you're absolutely right that seeing FIFA do the right thing is something that doesn't sit well with me, just because it hardly ever happens. But I don't see any other way this could go. I mean, there's going to be a revote, probably, right, eventually. And if there is a revote, like you said, where else does it go if not the USA?
I think it absolutely has to be the USA, because once again, it's not only stadiums, it's infrastructure. The United States leads the world in both categories. I've taken a look at the Japanese bid for 2022 from a couple of years ago, just the other day to look at it. And so much of it was speculatory, it was circumstantial. It was, we're going to build these new stadiums, which I'm sure, given the time frame, given the 12-year span, they could have done. But, if the vote, even if it's tomorrow, you've already lost 3 years of construction time. Another country that had the bid was Australia, which is sort of a similar country to the United States in terms of, popularity of soccer, but I don't see any upper hand Australia has on the United States when we're talking about, giving the cup to a country that needs to be ready almost immediately.
And we want to talk about, there is some noise on social media here. I want to get to the question. It's from Nathaniel on Facebook, and he asks, is FIFA making too much of a big deal over the bribery scandal with Qatar? And I think we both agree they're not making enough noise about this, right?
Well, yeah, I think, he's 180 degrees from this. I think on the complete other side of the spectrum, this is not news. I think there's been speculation, there's been whispers about the bribery scandal since the day after the vote. And I think it's finally time that, it's public knowledge now. FIFA can no longer sweep it under the rug. I think they're doing the absolute minimum to say, okay, might have been a little bit.
Perhaps this was a bad idea. And we'll see. And hopefully FIFA will be able to do the right thing, and we'll all be happy, and we'll have the World Cup here in the USA in 2022. That's the best case scenario, selfishly, in our perspective. Let's go back to basketball. The New York Knicks are a team that will not be in the NBA Finals. They're not in the NBA Finals now, and we're not really sure when they're ever going to get back to the NBA Finals. Their future is so uncertain. They don't even have a coach right now. Steve Kerr was one of the top contenders for that position, and he wound up leaving. He wound up going to the Golden State Warriors instead when he wanted to come back to coaching. You'd think that Phil Jackson, would bring people in, but it just seems like the situation in New York is too dire right now.
I mean, well, I think we look at the situation with the New York Knicks, and I was surprised by the surprise that came when Steve Kerr did not sign with the Knicks. You know, the backlash from Knicks fans saying, what? Why would he go to Golden State? Well, I mean, if you take a look at the Knicks situation and ignore that big word Knicks that I think basketball fans consider a huge word, it's a team that has no young assets, save Iman Shumpert. It's a team that has no first-round draft pick this year, no room of cap space to work around. Their best case offseason scenario is that Carmelo re-signs and they have almost the exact same team that just failed to make the playoffs, except this time everyone is 1 year older. And after that, we're not done here. We have not one, but two of the most demanding basketball presences in the front office in James Dolan and Phil Jackson. And there's the possibility that they could be on completely different pages.
And that's the thing that I think is the biggest issue here. Because when Phil Jackson came on to the Knicks front office, he said that he was promised total control over basketball operations. This would be Phil Jackson's team. He's going to make all the basketball decisions. And yet, he tries to lay off some people. He tries to lay off a few people. And James Dolan says, no, you can't do that. Comes in and he steps in. And it seems like Phil Jackson has control over this only when it's okay in the eyes of James Dolan. And if you're a coach, you don't want to have two guys, both of whom are your boss, fighting over stuff like this. If you had one, that would be a better situation. But if it's just two guys, I mean, I understand why they're having so much trouble finding anybody who can coach.
I mean, absolutely. It's a team that, if you take the job, who are you working for? That's your first question is you don't know who you're working for. And, after that, you don't know who you're working with either, because it's a team that, really doesn't have a 3-year plan to get better. They just missed the playoffs. And there's no 5-year goal to, get back to even where they were last season, which by Knicks standards was a whopping success. Making it to the second round of the playoffs and winning 50-plus games in the regular season. So, I mean, it's a team that really I don't see as having any direction and obviously no clear chain of command.
Yeah, the future is bleak right now for the New York Knickerbockers. If you want to know, the reports right now indicate that Derek Fisher might be that top choice, the Oklahoma City Thunder point guard for the coach of the New York Knicks. Let's move to baseball, but not the same baseball we were talking about earlier. We're talking about college baseball. The NCAA Super Regionals got underway today, the final 16 teams of the NCAA tournament, and all of them are going to be on national television. ESPN, ESPN2, and ESPNU are broadcasting every game of these Super Regionals. Do you think that college baseball, or at least this tournament, might actually gain some traction in the USA? Do you think people might watch this?
Well, I think it's impossible to say that it hasn't already gained traction from where college baseball was 10, 15, even 20 years ago. I mean, the surge in popularity that college baseball has gone through over the last 20 years is already impressive. So I think going forward, you mentioned every game in the Super Regionals and the College World Series is going to be on national TV. And if ESPN, who has all the broadcast rights, is really pushing this,
that's the key.
There's no way that it's not going to, gain at least some followers. I don't think college baseball is at the point where it's going to gain any more fans that are going to tune in from game one next year in February before baseball season starts. But I think 10 years down the road, if we're talking about the College World Series ratings numbers it's going to get this year and the ratings it gets in 2024, I'm sure it's going to increase.
Well, I know it'll increase, but I feel like this has to plateau somewhere only because the thing that college baseball lacks that we see in college basketball and more so in college football is star power. The thing about college baseball, and I like this, and I think basketball should institute this as well, is if you're a player, you've got a choice. Either you get drafted straight out of high school and go to the big leagues, or you go to college and stay for 3 years. So the best baseball players wind up getting drafted straight out of high school. And because, you never know how talent's going to pan out, it's not like when you're watching a basketball game and you see Jabari Parker and you see, wow, this is the star of the future. This is the guy who's going to go and get drafted by an NBA team and have a great career in the NBA. And that's one thing that can drive ratings of college sports that college baseball does not have right now.
And I think the way the system is set up, and which will be the way the system is set up for the foreseeable future, that's an impossible thing for college baseball to grasp. So we're talking about college football, college basketball. College baseball is never going to reach those levels.
Right.
And it's exactly for the reason you said, the reasons people watch college football and college basketball is because the passion, the fans of the school have, which is something that's just not a tradition in college baseball, and because you're seeing the future stars, the future Hall of Famers, which in college baseball you don't really have. You don't have those marquee names. And even if you do have those marquee names, it's so much harder in baseball because even if they are drafted in the first round, you might not see them play for 4 years. Jabari Parker, whether he's a Hall of Famer, whether he's a bust, his first season will be next year.
Yep, absolutely.
So you're talking about college baseball players who, you don't even know when they're going to be in the major leagues, if they're going to be in the major leagues.
You mentioned the passion of the fans. That's a really good point. And if you want to bring college baseball up to, into the national consciousness, that's what needs to happen. We need to have more devoted fans. We need to become, more of an event on campus. And that's something that's hard to ask when you've already got a winter sport and a fall sport. To say, okay, let's add a spring sport in the mix that's going to have to be a big campus event. That's a really difficult thing to ask.
Yeah, and I mean, when we're talking, you're talking about changing the culture of a campus, which, at 95% of the campuses across the nation isn't going to happen. I mean, the teams who are consistently top 5, top 10 teams in college baseball, I'm sure have a large student following.
They do,
but,
yep.
When we're talking about across the board, how, 50, 60, 70% of schools that have big-time football and basketball programs, every game is a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
That's just not going to happen in baseball.
Plus, they play with those aluminum bats, which I just can't stand that. We are running out of time. I'm going to do a real quick parting shot today, and it has to do with the NBA Finals, which we talked about back in the first block. And from when I was looking up the schedule for them and the tip-off time for each game, aside from Sunday night, they all start at 9 o'clock p.m., which is really strange because even when it was being played in Miami, all the way on the East Coast, they're still starting at 9 o'clock p.m. Very late, considering the NBA in the regular season usually takes about 2.5 hours, give or take, and I presume that's going to take just a bit longer when it's an NBA Finals game. I remember the prime time window being 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. Why are you starting a game at 9 so that in the best case scenario it ends at 11:30 and probably won't be done till nearly midnight? Why not actually just start the thing at 8 o'clock and get it done right then and there? And it's not just in the NBA. We're seeing this in football. We saw, Jack and I both. We only watched the first half of Sunday Night Football, of Monday Night Football. The thing starts at 8:30 and it goes so late into the night. We wind up snoozing off, staying up watching these football games. And in baseball as well, the World Series, even on the East Coast, starts at 8 or even at times 8:30 p.m. I just don't get it. I don't like it at all. I don't like having to stay up and watch these games. But the worst thing about it is, I'm sure ESPN knows a lot more about it than I do, and I'm sure they're making more money with these tip-off times. And there's nothing I can do about it. It's my take. What's it to you? And the show will return next week. We are going to preview the World Cup in Brazil. We're going to break everything down, give you everything that you need to know as the tournament begins coming up on June the 12th. For right now, we're going to say so long. But remember to keep blowing up our Facebook page. Send us some questions. Follow us on Twitter at Carter and Jack and with the hashtag What's It To You. And as always, subscribe on YouTube. Until next week, so long.